Hello sorcerers and songbirds, my name is TB Skyan, and yes, this is still Microsoft Zira providing my voice, as I am still recovering from oral surgery. Like before, you can mute or turn down the audio if you want, and turn on YouTube's native captions to read what I am saying instead. Anyway, the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. Oh yes, it is going to be one of those videos. I really wish I wasn't delivering it with this dispassionate robot voice, but oopsie doopsie, a dentist punched a hole in my mouth and that's the way the cookie crumbles. We are going to speak of dark subjects, and it is probably not going to be what you would traditionally think of as fun. I am going to articulate a number of my closely held personal political opinions, and it is at times probably going to feel preachy, so if you would like to skip this one, I do not blame you. I have some more light-hearted videos linked in the card up in the corner. Anyway, the convention defines genocide as follows. In the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial or religious group, as such. A. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. There are a few other legal requirements for the United Nations to classify something as a genocide, but note that a genocide can happen when any of the above list of things happens, not necessarily all of them. With that in mind, let us take a quick look at how Demacia treats the mages that live within its borders. Do they kill members of the group? The answer here is yes. In fact, they have a specialized police force dedicated specifically to the murder and imprisonment of mages. Do they cause serious bodily or mental harm to the group? Between the specialized mage murdering police and living in a state of constant terror that the mage murdering police might come for your family, the answer here is yes. Do they deliberately inflict on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction? Again, specialized police forces rounding up and murdering mages qualifies here, as do the concentration camps in which mages are imprisoned and continuously poisoned with petricide elixir to suppress their powers. Do they attempt to prevent births within the group? This one is arguable. Demacia considers magic heritable, but we have no direct evidence that they attempt to sterilize mages to prevent births. Do they forcibly transfer children of one group to another group? It might be possible to argue this point, but we know that children with magic will be forcibly taken away from their families and transferred to the effective ownership of the state, with Sylas being a prime example. Demacia is committing an ongoing genocide against mages. When I say that, it is not a stretch, or a generous interpretation. I do not have to reach for evidence or concoct tenuous connections. What Demacia is doing to the mages is by literal and objective definition, a genocide. Now allow me to say something which should not be controversial, and yet sometimes, to some people, it is. It is justified to resist a genocide, with violence. With all of that in mind, allow me to state the thesis of this video. Sylas is right. And I am not sure if Riot fully understands that. Sylas's story is told, as most champion stories are, in a combination of different media. Some parts are told in their biography, and in color and short stories, other parts are told in comics and animated shorts, and then some parts in their quasi-semi sort of not quite canon in-game interactions with other champions on Summoner's Rift. In his biography, we learn that Sylas is the child of a poor family, who is convinced to turn himself into the Demacian authorities as a mage. The mage murdering police, the mage seekers, realize that his ability to sense magic will be a useful tool for finding mages that they can imprison or murder, and so they put him to work as a mage seeker himself. It is worth noting that Sylas is, at this point, a child. A child who is being used to identify human beings who are to be imprisoned for life, for the crime of being born with a trait that the Demacian state has decided is a threat to its power. When Sylas finds a young girl, a child even younger than him, who is a powerful mage, he attempts to protect her from being imprisoned and poisoned for her entire life. The mage seekers react to any resistance whatsoever with immediate violence, and in the aftermath of an awful magical accident, they imprison Sylas, who remember is still a child, for life. Then, the biography goes on to say that Sylas languished in the darkest depths of the mage seeker compound, forced to wear heavy shackles of magic dampening petricite. Robbed of his arcane sight, his heart turned as hard as the stone that bound him, and he dreamed of vengeance on all who had put him there. Which is where the Lux comic picks up. Sylas is introduced on the front page of the comic like this. On the left, Garen Crownguard, standing proud against a blue and pristine sky, with the thriving city behind him. On the right, Sylas framed by flames and smoke, surrounded by blood red, and his face in shadow, with the demonic magical glow emanating from his eyes. Well, that is certainly an unbiased way to introduce a character. In the actual comic itself, Sylas appears for the first time on the very last pages of the book, and it looks like this. Sylas is introduced to Lux, pretty much exactly the same way that Hannibal Lecter is introduced to Clarice Starling in Silence of the Lambs. Well, that is certainly an unbiased way to introduce a character. In his color story, The Recruit, he welcomes a new recruit to the cause by having him watch as he violently executes a nobleman's retinue of servants to the jeers of a bloodthirsty mob, and then he manipulates the young recruit into murdering the nobleman personally. Well, that is certainly an unbiased way to okay, you get the joke. Sylas's presentation softens in the next few issues of the comic, being portrayed much more humanely as he ingratiates himself with Lux, and manipulates her into bringing him food, books, and crucial information with which he can make his escape. When she speaks up for him at his execution, he steals her magic and uses it to kill. The pages show Sylas inflicting destruction on Demacia, and terror on the civilians. The visuals focus on the carnage, and show Sylas standing happily breathing the air of freedom among a field of corpses. Again, for perspective, Sylas is the prisoner of a concentration camp escaping from a firing squad, and the story frames this escape as unnecessarily violent and the escapee as a sadistic murderer. The comic maintains this framing of Sylas's actions, always taking time to focus on the destruction he causes, the victims of his violence. Substantially less time, and believe me, I have counted the panels by hand, is dedicated to showing the suffering of the mages that he is attempting to free from tyranny. Families hiding their children from the secret police, people forced to abandon their families to go on the run, prisoners forced to drink poison and incarcerated for life without trial for the crime of being born different. These things are mentioned in passing, happening off camera, but never dwelled upon. The structural injustice is backgrounded in favor of the personal drama between characters, and Sylas's character is not portrayed positively. As Sylas puts Jarvan IV, Prince of Demacia and heir to the throne of the country that has been conducting a systemic genocide on mages for centuries, on a mocking show trial, the mages are framed as a screaming mob clamoring for blood and revenge. And Sylas is framed as a stereotypical demagogue whipping them into a frenzy. Sylas is shown taking special sadistic pleasure in attempting to force Jarvan to eat live rats, the same way that he was forced to in order to survive in prison. Sylas's relationship with Lux is framed as one of an experienced sociopath manipulating a young woman for his own gain, again, Hannibal Lecter meeting Clarice Starling. He is portrayed as duplicitous and disloyal to their friendship, and when he is shown free in the Demacian hinterlands, he is framed again as the demagogue, preaching to a mob and speaking of spilling blood. All of this is to say the obvious. Sylas is the villain of the Lux comic. And Demacia is portrayed as flawed, and in need of reform, but despite committing crimes on a much grander scale than Sylas, it is never shown to be as evil or unjust as, for example, Mordor, in Lord of the Rings. Jarvan IV blames mages for his father's death, and so we are meant to understand, even if we do not agree, the extreme increase in violations and oppression he institutes as the understandable actions of a grieving son. Garen, loyal enforcer of Demacia, is framed as a sympathetic man just trying to protect his sister in an impossible situation, without much attention paid to just how many people he has had thrown in prison for life, or murdered, for the crime of being mages. The Lux comic is eager in the extreme to point out that not all Demacians are bad. It shows the only person truly articulating the moral necessity of the emancipation of mages, and the teardown of the unjust power structure that oppresses them, as a violent sadistic sociopath, and takes great pains to showcase the nuanced humanity of those who benefit from and perpetuate the oppression of mages. The validity of Demacia as a nation, its right to exist in spite of its centuries-long campaign of genocide, is never questioned with any credibility. The Mage Revolution, however, and especially its leader, are repeatedly framed as excessively violent, excessively destructive, and a threat to innocence everywhere. So let me just repeat the point I started the video making. Demacia is committing genocide against the mages. Demacia has been committing this genocide for centuries. And resisting a genocide with violence is morally justified. In the storytelling we have seen about the Mage Rebellion so far. And I am eminently open to Riot doing future storytelling that takes a different tone. Riot seems to be trying to take a neutral, centrist stance on this storyline. They have spent a lot of time humanizing and exploring the conflicted hearts of those who are committing and benefiting from the genocide, and they have made an effort to emphasize the destruction and violence caused by those who resist that genocide. They have not made an equivalent effort to showcase the generation-spanning trauma, violence, and horror inflicted on the mages by the Demacian state. When Sylas speaks of spilling the blood of oppressors, we are not shown the oppression he is denouncing in nearly the same detail as we are shown the carnage that results from his struggle. No extended scene of mages in concentration camps, deprived of their freedom by mage seekers, living in constant terror of violence and execution. No dwelling on the effects of being repeatedly forced to drink petricide elixir. No children being torn from the arms of their mothers to live a life in imprisonment. No orphans struggling to survive after their parents are murdered by the state. No generational trauma caused by centuries of a community living in fear and isolation. No emaciated old men, dying alone and insane after decades of solitary imprisonment. I should stress, however, that while resisting genocide with violence, up to and including lethal violence, is justified, that is not, repeat, not, the same as saying that all violence done in the name of resisting genocide is automatically justified. Sylas commits violence against both the nobles and power structure that oppresses mages, and against anyone who happens be in his way at any given time. As we have discussed, his character is that of a violently unhinged fanatic, for whom the cause is in part an excuse to indulge in his thirst for sadistic retaliatory violence. Sylas's actions are motivated by a desire to liberate mages from oppression, but also clearly by personal vengeance not in service to any greater purpose, or to anyone's benefit but himself. The point I am making in this video is not that Sylas has done nothing wrong. He has done many, many things wrong. The point is that if you are going to focus on the negative consequences of a rebellion, and on the feelings and fears of the powerful people being rebelled against, then it behooves you to give appropriate attention also to the conditions and circumstances that are being rebelled against. If you insist on seeing both sides in the story on the one hand, but ultimately devote a lot more attention to one side than the other, then you are not taking a dispassionate middle position in allowing the reader to draw their own conclusions, you are displaying what from the outside looks like an implicit bias. Having said that, I want to stress that I am not accusing the writers at Riot of having a bias in favor of mage genocide. That is ridiculous. I am criticizing the storytelling so far for not being properly balanced, and pointing out that given the gravity of the issue, this can look really bad if not addressed properly. I am not, in this video, arguing that Riot need to rewrite Sylas to be a perfect unproblematic cinnamon roll with no flaws. I am not saying that it is wrong to write about the consequences of violent rebellion for the lives of people caught in the middle. I am not saying that Garen or Jarvan cannot be portrayed as nuanced human beings with complex internal lives and moral struggles about their actions. The criticism I am attempting to articulate here is that Riot's narrative team created a hypothetical situation to explore a moral question, and the nature of ongoing struggles in the human experience, but the ways in which they are exploring these questions are lopsided, imbalanced, and biased towards a centrism that I think is deeply concerning given the gravity of the issues they have chosen to interrogate. As it stands right now, the way the Demacian story is being told, the Mage Rebellion is not framed as fully justified in violent resistance to genocide. That is a problem that I think should be fixed. My proposed solution is more stories, and more clarity in the narrative voices that are doing the storytelling about the moral stakes of the storyline. Again, please for the love of God, do not interpret this as some kind of moralistic attack on Riot's writers. This is not a call-out post, or a drama video. I am not posting receipts, or spilling tea, and I am not calling for anyone to be fired, and I do not want to see anyone who agrees with my criticisms show up in the mentions of Riot's writers accusing them of being genocide apologists or some other such nonsense. This is a critique of a series of storytelling choices, and a critique of how a fictional issue with a lot of real-world baggage is being framed. Please treat it as such. I wish I did not have to spell this out in such excruciating detail, but the internet is the internet, and I am not taking chances given the weight of the themes we are discussing here. Anyway, at the conclusion of the video, I would like to stress that I am fully in favor of League of Legends storytelling engaging with complex and weighty subjects. I like that the lore and the universe has been expanded in complexity beyond the rather stilted archetypes that formed its beginnings. I like that Noxus is not a flatly evil empire, and that Demacia are not uncomplicated fantasy good guys. I think Sylas and his story brings something unique and valuable to the lore. I think the themes that are explored through him and Lux are fascinating and should be expanded on more. But if Riot are going to delve into such a deeply serious subject, with such substantial real-world parallels, as the persecution and genocide of minorities by a state power. And here I will remind you that Riot are the ones who quite intentionally injected these subjects into the game. Then I think it is appropriate to treat the stories that they tell with the seriousness and critical respect that these subjects deserve. And that means holding them to a higher standard than you would usually hold a silly fantasy game about floating cats and slime monsters, punching each other until a crystal explodes. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that the robot voice did not play too badly with the seriousness of the subject matter. I am trying to rest my mouth as much as I can, so I can hopefully be able to do some videos or a stream with my real voice for a KDA music video, or the cards in the Legends of Runeterra Targon expansion. If you have enjoyed the video, please consider clicking the like button, as it will help force the algorithm not to bury my video when it realizes the subjects I am discussing in it. You can also subscribe. I mean, if you want to. I'd appreciate it. If you want to support me in making videos that take fantasy stories far too seriously, then I have a Patreon, a merchandise store and a tip jar, which you can use if you want, and I would be very grateful for the help. If not, that is completely okay as well, but at the end of my videos, I try to emphasize that if there is content online that brings some joy into your life, you should try to support it with whatever you can, whenever you can. Especially for niche or smaller content creators, a direct donation of even $1 can be worth the same as thousands of ad views on a video. If you can't donate directly, please do not ever feel bad about it. Watching the videos, liking, and maybe sharing them is enough. But if you can support your favorite content creators directly, please consider doing it. It makes much more of an impact than you might think. Anyway, I also have a second channel. I wish I could say new content is going up on it, but I still can't talk, so I can't record anything. Still, I have read some nice short stories over there, in my real voice, if you want to remember what I sound like, and there are plenty of full playthroughs and analyses of games like Final Fantasy VII, Dream Daddy, Hollow Knight and Metal Gear Solid you can watch over there if you like. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to wash your hands, and if you are going to be around people, help keep them safe by wearing a mask.